Hello and welcome to this module where we will be dealing with the question of just how do humans acquire language? In another lecture, we have seen how language is highly complex and structured at multiple levels. We saw that relatively simple structures like phonemes combine to form morphemes, which in turn combine to form words, and then syntactic rules allow words to be arranged to form meaningful sentences. The speakers of a language seem to learn all of this, and most people have about 40,000 words on an average at their disposal to communicate with each other. What is even more fascinating is the fact that children seem to have learnt thousands of words and rules of grammar of their native language so that they speak without making grammatical errors by the age of 5 or 6 years. It is no wonder then that psychologists are interested in finding out just how the human mind accomplishes this feat. In today's lecture, we are going to understand the stages of language development and also the factors that help or hinder the development of language. In order to speak a language fluently, a child must learn phonemes that are peculiar to that language, then words, and finally the rules of combining words into sentences. What scientists have discovered is that human infants are at birth capable of learning any human language. They are able to discriminate between sounds that correspond to different phonemes of any language. But if they are exposed to only their language, then as they grow 1 year old, they lose the ability to discriminate between sounds that correspond to the same phoneme in their language. They learn the phonemes that are relevant to their language, and they can discriminate between sounds that correspond to different phonemes in their own native language. This is very much like adults. As adults, we can also discriminate between sounds that correspond to different phonemes in our language, but we cannot discriminate between sounds that correspond to the same phoneme in our language. This is a video that you should watch in order to understand how human infants gradually lose their capacity to distinguish between phonemes that correspond to the same sound in their own language.
Infants are born with the flexibility to learn any language. The obscure Indian dialect spoken here is helping psychologist Janet Worker discover when babies lose that potential, when in fact they begin to master a single language.
What I would like you to do is help me think of some words that are used in the Thompson language that differ in only a single sound.
Like Graham and Graham.
We teach the baby to turn her head when the sound changes. In testing, we can then tell if the baby can hear the sound change because she turns her head in anticipation of the toys coming on. The toys then serve as a reward for a correct head turn.
This 8-month-old baby has no trouble anticipating the appearance of the toys. She turns when she hears the sound change. This baby is a year old. For him, the difference in sounds no longer exists. He only turns after the toys have appeared.
There's a reorganization in speech perception across the first year of life so that the young infant is born ready to learn any human language. And experience then functions to narrow that universal set of abilities, that universal discriminatory ability to be specific to the particular language that the baby is learning.
Human infants pick up language at a phenomenal rate. They seem to copy the facial movements of adults and imitate speech sounds. Let us look at these two videos. In the first video, we saw that babies as young as 6 months of age begin to communicate by using speech sounds. They can express joy, fear, anger and desires by making sounds. This use of sounds is called babbling. So, although the baby utters sounds like mama and dada, they do not mean mother or daddy. From this time until they become 1 year old, most babies learned to pronounce meaningful words. They already have concepts for family members, food, body parts and objects that they see around them. They mainly communicate using single words like doggy, spoon, car, apple. By about 1.5 years of age, children have a vocabulary of about 25 words. However, this does not mean that the baby does not have more concepts. They have many more concepts but do not yet know the right words for the concepts. And so, while communicating, children often overextend their words. Overextension means that they use the word that they have at their disposal to express neighboring concepts. For example, they may say cow while pointing out to a horse, a donkey or a mule. But they may not have the words horse, donkey and mule. Slowly, as the child's vocabulary increases, the need for such overextensions reduces. Thus, by the age of 2.5 years, overextensions begin to disappear. What is even more stunning is that children's vocabulary reaches to about 15,000 words by the age of 6 years. That means that they have to pick up as many as 10 new words per day. We have so far tried to understand how children learn phonemes and words. A much more complex feat that children accomplish is to learn the rules or the syntax of a language. Rarely do we find children of age 6 making grammatical errors while speaking their native language. Let us look at the stages of language acquisition from the point of view of syntax. By the age of 2 years, children start constructing two-word sentences. Have a look at some of these two-word sentences that 2-year-olds make. Cat bed, papa office, doll sleep. As you can see, these sentences do not have grammatical words like a, and, the, or prepositions like in, on, or verbs like is, went, or even morphemes like ing. Yet, these sentences convey what the child wants to express. Thus, children use words that express the most important content. It is easy to make out that the child wants to say the cat is on the bed, or papa went to his office, or the doll is sleeping. In the next few months, children rapidly progress to form complex sentences which have verbs and verb phrases. They then start making use of conjunctions and prepositions, and soon they also begin to conjugate the verbs so that their sentences express the tense of the verbs too. Thus, cat bed becomes cat on bed, and then the cat is on the bed. From this point, children move ahead to form complex sentences such as papa has gone to office and I am going to school. In the beginning, children may not use personal pronouns I or me, but they may refer to themselves in the third person. Gradually, after the age of 2.5 years, they begin to make use of pronouns like I and me. Now, at this point, let us take a little break. You will now hear some sounds, and you have to guess how old the baby must be.
Hello, Mama. How are you, Mama?
And the answers are, the first baby should be roughly 6 months old. The second is a 2-year-old child, and the third sound that you heard was that of a 1-year-old child. Psychologists are interested in knowing whether there are some innate mechanisms that help human babies acquire language, or if language is entirely learnt. Let us understand some of the researches that shed light on this important question. One pathway through which language is learnt is imitation. We all know that babies learn by imitating adults. Let us watch this video.
No.
Can you say mommy?
Mommy.
Can you say daddy?
Daddy.
Can you say all done?
Daddy.
Can you say thank you?
Daddy.
Can you say
Adults seem to greatly enjoy the process of teaching children to say words and sentences and even songs and poems. It is undoubtedly true that children do learn by imitating adults. In fact, many children use the same tone as their parents or older siblings to express emotions like joy, sadness, excitement, fear, and anger. While there is no doubt that imitation is one of the mechanisms in language acquisition, psychologists believe that it cannot explain the whole story. This is because children often say sentences that they have never heard any adult say. They seem to be experimenting with words while trying to convey something. Another evidence in support of the argument that not all language is learned by imitation is the mistakes children make. Look at these sentences that children between the ages of 2.5 and 6 years of age utter. I catched the ball. I falled on the ground. I goed to the kitchen. What do these sentences suggest? The child seems to be learning a rule of grammar which says that if an action has been completed, that is, the verb is in the past tense, the suffix ed is added to the word. However, the mistake shows that the child has not learned that there are exceptions to this rule. Obviously, the child could not have picked this up from any adult. Another pathway which may guide language acquisition is conditioning. This means that adults may reward children when they utter grammatically correct sentences and reprimand them when they make mistakes. For example, in some languages, the verbs in a sentence are conjugated differently according to the gender of the subject. When a boy child refers to himself in a sentence but then uses a verb that is female, adults around him may correct him until he gets it right. But researchers have found that even conditioning may not be the whole story. Had conditioning been the only mechanism through which children pick up rules of syntax, adults would have to reward each and every correct utterance and reprimand each and every wrong utterance of a child. That does not seem to be the case. Usually, adults do not reward the child for every correct utterance. Moreover, even if they point out mistakes, children may continue to use the same words. Yet another pathway that psychologists have tried to explore is the hypothesis testing pathway. Children seem to generate hypotheses about rules of grammar and apply them in their speech. For example, they may generate the hypothesis add ed to the verb in order to form past tense. They learn that when words like wash are converted to washed, they show past tense. Children make mistakes only in those cases where the verbs are irregular. They get corrected by adults and eventually stop making these mistakes of overgeneralization. Slobin in 1985 studied language acquisition in children from 40 different languages and proposed that children follow these principles while learning to talk and understand speech. 1. Look for systematic changes in the form of words. 2. Look for grammatical markers that clearly indicate changes in meaning. 3. Avoid exceptions. 4. Pay attention to the ends of words. 5. Pay attention to the order of words, prefixes and suffixes. And 6. Avoid interruption or rearrangement of constituents. More recently, researchers have begun to think that it may not only be about learning rules and applying them, but it may also be about learning many different associations of the word endings and properties of the word itself. Thus, children may be learning that all verbs that end with OOK, such as cook, hook, look, will have an ed suffix in the past tense. There are many other things that children pick up about language that cannot be explained even in terms of associations. For example, if the word learn is used as a verb, its past tense is learnt, but if an ed ending is added to it, then it becomes an adjective. Language learning thus involves learning rules, associations and memory too. At this point, let us take a small break and try to answer this question. What are the 3 pathways that partially explain language acquisition that we have considered so far? Now the answer is imitation, conditioning and hypothesis testing. So far it seems that learning does seem to play a part in language acquisition, but it cannot explain the phenomenon of language acquisition entirely. Psychologists have also tried to understand if the mechanism of language is innate. Are infants born with some innate potential to acquire language, so that if they are exposed to language, they will learn and acquire it in the same way? If that is the case, children across all cultures should show the same pattern of language development. There should also be a critical period of development, so that when the brain or the physical apparatus is maturing, the child should be exposed to language and only then will the child acquire the language. Finally, if the mechanism of acquiring language is innate, then is it unique to the human species? Let us see what psychologists have found out. To answer the first question about whether the pattern of language development is same for all children across different cultures, researchers have indeed found that irrespective of the culture, children begin to utter a few meaningful but isolated words around the age of 1 year. They begin to utter 2-word sentences by the age of 2 years. By the age of 3 years, children's sentences become more grammatical, and by the 4th year, their speech is more like that of an adult. Another evidence for the proposition that humans have an innate language processing device, as thought about by the linguist Chomsky, is that children seem to acquire language even though they are not exposed to role models or users of the language. There has been a study where 6 deaf children who were born to hearing parents were studied for their language acquisition. These parents had decided not to use sign language with their children. These 6 children had developed a system of gestures called home sign, which was initially just a simple pantomime. But over time it evolved into a complex system which had morphemes, syntactic rules and was similar to a normal language. In answering the second question about a critical period, there does seem to be a critical period when the physical apparatus matures, and if the child is exposed to language during this time, it acquires language. If there is no exposure during this time, it becomes very difficult to acquire language. We all know that if a young child is exposed to a second language, the child learns to speak the new language without an accent. But if adults try to learn a new language, they may never be able to unlearn the accent. An adult who tries to learn a foreign language can do well initially because theoretically they may understand the grammatical rules of the language better than a child. But eventually the child learns the language much better than the adult. Now let us consider the famous case of Jeannie. This child was born to a father who was psychotic and a mother who was blind. Right up to the age of 11, this girl was raised in extreme isolation. She had had no contact with other people. She lacked any linguistic ability. After the welfare authorities rescued her, they tried to teach her language, but she could not advance beyond the level of a third grade child. She was intelligent, but she could not acquire language because the critical period was past. Finally, we deal with the question of whether language acquisition is unique to humans. Now this is a must-watch video for this lecture. The link for this video is provided here on the screen and it is also provided in your references. Researchers have been trying for a long time to see if apes, chimpanzees, gorillas and bonobos can be taught language. Results have shown that they can learn some symbols, sure, and even respond to some simple commands, but they do not have the ability to combine words to form new sentences. They cannot use the syntax of the language to distinguish between sentences like the man hurt the tiger from the tiger hurt the man. They do not have the ability to use language to express curiosity, ask questions, generate new hypotheses, or understand abstract concepts. Thus, language in its highly sophisticated form seems to be unique to humans. And there does seem to be some innate mechanism which makes human language a whole class apart from the language that animals use. With this, we come to the end of our lecture on language acquisition. Hope you have enjoyed learning this. Thank you.